Welcome to Culture, Cake and Yoga, the show where we take a look at anything employee wellbeing. We focus on how leaders successfully build this into their culture, so it is simply something that happens each day and becomes a habit. And we share how leaders and all employees can better look after their own wellbeing, something that is so important today with the challenges we continue to face. I'm with Liz today, one of our very favourite head teachers here at Welbee, and I'm just going to ask her to introduce herself.
Thank you very much. My name is Liz Bartholomew, head teacher of the Mayflower Primary School in Harwich, which is a peninsula in northeast Essex. I've been here now for about 6 years, just finishing my 6th year, and been a head, well, I'm in my 11th year of headship. But yeah, Harwich is Mayflower's a lovely school. Harwich is a lovely place, but it is a very deprived area. So we actually do have about 51% PPG pupils. So it can be a challenge some days, not going to lie.
And the reason I've asked Liz to join us on the Welbee podcast is because they've been a customer now for 4 years, and every year in their survey, in the poster survey, they've just scored outstandingly well. If not the highest scoring, but it probably is. It's certainly in the handful of high scoring schools we've ever had, and that goes across all the 4 years. So through COVID, beyond COVID, and in the latest survey, which they've just run, and I did the results review with Liz last week, they continue to deliver outstanding scores in all of the management standards. So I thought it'd be really useful to invite Liz today to share some of the secret sauce, to find out just how does she do it when everybody else is talking about the real challenges. And it's a primary school, but it's more than 50 staff, so it's a fair size. So I'm going to ask Liz a number of questions. I'm going to start by just saying, hey, what is that secret sauce? You know, every year without fail since we started working together, you've demonstrated, or your staff have demonstrated, that their well-being is at a very high level. So, you know, how do you do it?
Well, there's lots of things, but I think one of the things I really believe in is that we talked about this before, that just because it's a bit tough out there, actually it doesn't mean we can't make it a really nice place to work. And teaching is one of the toughest jobs in the world. And I really think that I'm a little bit of what I call a bit of a Richard Branson. Actually, although in every school we say children that come first, you know, obviously safeguarding things come first, but actually I kind of feel it needs to be that my adults, my grown-ups, my staff need to come first, because unless I've got really, really confident, happy staff, then that won't translate into the children. So it's a little bit back to front, because obviously, yes, children come first in terms of everything else, but actually I think staff are a massively high priority for me, and I think maybe that's the crux of what we all do here.
No, I can't agree, and I think that's why we work together so well, because the philosophies, the values are so similar. Because the best way to put children first, I think, is actually to put staff first, which I guess doesn't necessarily mean you put children second, no. But it does mean that actually you've got to prioritise ensuring that you know, staff are fit, healthy, motivated, feeling good, coming to work every day to do their best work and feel really valued and supported, which I think is what you do. So we started working 4 years ago, and in that very first survey you scored very well. So perhaps it'd be really good just to talk through some of those. We talk a lot about well-being, like building a house, putting down firm foundations, you know, so maybe just talk about some of those foundations that enable you to put staff first, or, you know, what have you done to make sure staff do feel that they're kind of loved, belong and looked after?
I think it starts with the little things, and I think it starts with a thank you, or an acknowledgement of things they've done or things they've achieved. And by that, I don't mean going out buying lavish gifts. I'm not talking about the same old emails all the time that, you know, generically say, oh, thank you, everyone, because actually that can be too much. But it's actually just saying a thank you at the right time to the right person and acknowledging that actually I do know what you're doing and I do know it's hard and I do appreciate what you've done. So I think the little things like that. Then on top of that, there are other little tiny things that I think really help in a busy, challenging workplace. Things like just making sure that we all know that there are times when we email each other. Because you've always got some staff, and I do get it, that some, you know, have got busy lives outside of school. So actually they want to do all their emailing at 11 o'clock at night. I'm old, I'm in bed by 9 o'clock. So actually I don't want to get an email at 11 o'clock at night. So we talked about having email parameters. Let's not email each other before 8 o'clock in the morning, because let's pretend our day starts at 8 o'clock. We all know it really doesn't, but let's pretend it starts at 8 o'clock. And let's not email after about 5:30. Again, we know it doesn't really end at 5:30, but actually just having those parameters, I think, is really important, because it means actually what you're saying is, I value that you have a life outside of that time, and that actually we can schedule those emails. We can still write it while it's in my head. You know, there's always somebody that says, oh, but if I don't write it down now while it's in my head, I'll forget. That's fine. Write your email, but schedule it for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, or for, you know, later on during the day. So I think little things like that, I think, are really important. Just saying thank you and just acknowledging that actually we've all got a life outside of school, even though I know most of us will work a lot for school outside of school, which teacher doesn't, but actually just acknowledging that that's a thing, I think, is really important.
Okay, so those small things, I mean, it's interesting about emails, and it's something, you know, we talk about. Sometimes people fire back around, yes, but what about, I get a lot of emails then at 8 o'clock on a morning and what have you. I'm guessing you've agreed your approach, but what do you say to people that perhaps say, well, that's fine scheduling it like that, but what if then I walk into work and I've got, you know, it's a Monday morning and I've got my plans and suddenly there's 10 emails for me to do, and that adds pressure. Is that something you've discussed or covered?
Yeah, that was all part of the discussion, and we did all acknowledge that. And in fact, it becomes a joke now. It's part of our day, because at 8 o'clock we all know that might be when your email box, your inbox starts to go ping, 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 ping. But actually it's become a bit of a joke. It's become something nice that we can all laugh about. Because actually we'd prefer to have them within work when we're there than having them at 12 o'clock at night or whenever. And I think it's important to have that understanding that, yes, you might want to send them at 11 or 12 o'clock at night, but then it does put pressure on the person receiving, because often when you receive an email, we're all very conscientious in our jobs. We all might think, oh gosh, that person might think I'm ignoring them if I'm not answering that email. But we have to have that equal acknowledgement that, well, no, I'm not going to answer your email at midnight, because quite frankly, I'm fast asleep. So it's that give and take. And yes, it all was part and parcel of the conversation. Definitely.
I think that's important to agree things, isn't it? And have you agreed anything around how people might, you know, the timescales by which people are expected to respond? You know, any things on that? Because I might get a load at 8 o'clock, but is there any kind of agreement around timelines when I might expect a response, or when parents might expect a response?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a communication policy as well, which outlines that sort of thing. And depending on what email it is, the type of email, the kind of expectations of, well, when do you think that should be answered, especially with parents, because that's hard, because we also have other systems in place where parents can communicate with us, not necessarily through email, but they might email or communicate at, you know, 10 o'clock in the morning and expect an answer by, you know, 11. And of course, we have to remind parents, well, no, but that's not going to happen, because teachers are actually teaching in those times. And so, yeah, we do have policies around that. But again, all our policies in those kinds of situations are very much discussed, and we don't ever just say, here are blanketly, this is it. It's always a conversation, some kind of consultation beforehand, which actually links really well with one of our other things that the staff here enjoy. is we do have forums. We have teacher and support staff forums, which is an opportunity. We use some of our staff meeting times, and we have staff meetings during the day for our support staff, because they tend to work up to the end of the school day and not beyond. But we have regular times for them to have forums where we open the floor and say, okay, you can either maybe talk about something that's troubling you, or an issue within the classroom that you need help with, or it might be something that actually you'd like to share. You might have come across something that you've done or seen and you'd like to share it as a real success. But it's just an opportunity to come to the table with something that maybe needs further discussion. And that's been incredibly successful in terms of sharing good practice with, people come with maybe challenging scenarios, and we all talk it through and come up with a wealth of ideas, and people go away going, oh, well, I'm going to try that, I'm going to try this, oh, thank you for that, thank you for this, and that. So it's giving them a voice. So it's not just, being part of a consultation or part of a policy making, but it's actually having a voice in the wider sense in the school that I think is really important.
So before you very kindly sent me a list of all the things you were doing after I did your results review, which are always one of the most fun results reviews, because when there's not a lot to talk about and a lot of good news, it's much easier than some of the schools I talk about where there's lots of opportunities or action to do. But before we jump into some more things, I guess, just speculating really, if you go to schools that score poorly, for instance, on our survey, or where perhaps well-being isn't good, or where they're losing staff because of the environment, what are some things you probably identify that might be going wrong, that might need people to focus? Or if you were going to a new school that wasn't performing well, where might you look?
I look at staff absence, because that's always a key area to look at. If there's high staff absence, I want to dig deeper and find out why. And I think that often is one of the root, not a cause, but that's a root area that is going to signify that, well, if they're not here, is there a reason why they're not here? So I think looking at staff absence is definitely something. And looking at some of those processes about things like how are you monitoring what's going on? Is it a very formal judgmental process, or is it very much a developmental process that's done with the staff? Is there a mixture of developing and CPD and forward thinking, or is it very much a them and us scenario? I think all those sorts of things are really important to consider in a school and in an environment. It's all about the culture and the ethos of the school. I think that's what's really, really important, is actually we're all in this together, so let's make it a really nice place to be. Don't want to come to work and be miserable.
No, absolutely. So just talk about some of those developmental opportunities that you use in your school, or how you've gone about building the ethos that I know is there, that this really inclusive and supportive culture. What are some of the things that you kind of do to avoid the idea of monitoring and judgments?
So obviously we do monitor. That's part and parcel of the senior leaders' role anyway, and subject leaders. But we have over the years developed some really interesting monitoring processes. We started off by still doing partly formal lesson observations, but half of it was less the lesson observation, but just talking to the children about their work, with their books, not just taking a pile of books away and blanketly making a judgment. It was a developmental process. Let's talk to the children, what's in your books, see a little bit of the lesson, look at the planning. But at the end of the day, we still found, after surveying our staff, that they found these really stressful, because at the end of the day, we're still going in and doing a lesson observation. They imagine you coming in with your clipboard, a bit like an inspector, and that terrified them. So we talked about, well, what would you prefer? What do you like? They loved the bit where you'd sit down with the children, talk about their work, look at their books, and have that pupil voice. So we've developed that even more. And we now use something called the Pupil Book Study, which is from a book by a chap called Alex Bedford. But instead of having the formal lesson observations, which to be fair, let's be honest, a lot of the time are sort of standalone lessons that have been planned weeks in advance and a little bit different from your normal practice. Instead of that, we just do a lot more learning walks. We spend a lot more time in people's classrooms daily doing learning walks, or whatever you want to call them, lesson dips. I don't know what you want to call them, but it's just being out there. And it's not just me as the head, it's not just the deputy, it's my senior leaders, but it's everybody. So now we're all part and parcel of learning walks. So where we have subject release time, and I do understand in some schools that's very difficult to give people additional release time. We're lucky, we're a 2-form entry primary. So we've got a lot of bodies and we can internally cover that. But I let people have that release time to get out and have a look and see what's going on. So if you're an English lead, a maths lead, a history or a geography, you need to see what's happening in those lessons. So we do very much do the monitoring, but it's in much more of a less judgmental way. It's much more formative. It's like, all right, I've gone round and I've seen this great practice. I've seen that great practice. I've talked to the children. I've seen what's going on in their books. We always have it on an agenda in a staff meeting to feed back and to talk about it. We can have development points. This is where we're going as a school. This is where we need to be looking forward. These people are doing these things really great. Obviously, if there's an issue, if there's something we find, we think, oh, that's not quite right, then that's done privately, you know, one-to-one, and things are worked out. But actually, the sheer fact that they don't have the threat of the lesson observation 3 times a year, I'm going to come in and do a lesson observation. Now, I'm in and out of the classroom all the time and they don't even really notice, because it's part and parcel of what we do. They're not worried if they don't get immediate feedback, because actually if you don't get immediate feedback, it probably means everything's actually fine. But you know, it's those sorts of things, and that they feel trusted, that actually they're doing their job, and that I know they're doing it well. And that, yes, I will pop in and see them, and I will have a talk to their children. I will look at their children's books with their children, but actually they know that that is just part and parcel of what we do, and they no longer feel judged or sit in fear waiting for the day that I say, right, now it's time for our termly whatevers. So I think that's been a real process, and has one that's been really valued by the staff. They feel much more valued, they feel much more trusted, but at the same time, because we're doing it to each other, they're also getting development, because there's nothing better than actually going and seeing somebody else do it and then going, oh, I really like what you're doing in there. Oh, I might try that in my class. And that's all part and parcel of the development. You know, it develops your teachers that are maybe newer, less experienced. They might do it, first of all, with a senior leader to help get that experience and to learn from them. It's all part and parcel of developing and being a team and working towards the same goals, I think.
And perhaps that explains as well, because you know, when we look at your scores and we filter them and look at them across the different you know, from support staff in and out of the classroom and teachers and leaders, you know, it was universally high scores across the board, so there weren't kind of groups that were looking exposed. And I guess also when you're doing this regularly, people probably expect and accept feedback from others as well, if we're doing it 2 ways. So that explains a lot. And it's about, I think, you know, creating that psychological safe culture. It's interesting, you know, when Google, when they did a lot of their people analytics and work about what makes a great team, they came up with, well, they discovered in their research that it was this psychological safety that was number one. That was the work of Amy Edmondson. I think it's fascinating, you know, if you've read people like Matthew Syed's book on black box thinking and things like that, that actually is probably the number one thing that people want, is just to feel secure. And if they get things wrong, they'll get supported. It doesn't mean you tolerate poor performance. It doesn't mean you don't. It just means you do it with compassion. You do it in the right way, etc. And certainly when I speak to you and other bits, that's what I kind of get back. This thing that, irrespective of all the noise out there, doesn't mean you can't just, you know, keep calm and behave, as I said, with that compassion. So what are some other things then that you're doing? Because I guess people are much more interested in hearing practical tips from people actually doing the job than they are listening to me. So what are some other things that you kind of highlight that you think you do regularly, or you've built into your culture, that you think really make a difference?
So other things we do that are definitely built into the culture is that we work as a team. There's no working in isolation here. We might have subject leads, but you're not a subject lead on your own in isolation. You're actually part of a team. So we work in curriculum communities. We have 5 of them. We have the humanities, the creative, citizenship, equality and diversity, and the SEND communities. And actually working within a community means that you've got support. You've got people to turn to. So you're grouped in, like-minded sort of subjects. And it means actually you're never tackling something alone. You've always got someone to talk to turn to, someone who'll be supportive. Someone, if you get stuck, you think, oh, I'm not sure what I'm doing here, that will help you. And we regularly meet as a whole team within those communities. We meet within those communities, but as a whole team as well, the whole school together, which I think is really important. I think other little things like developing policies that are supportive of well-being. In terms of feedback and marking, we have absolutely no need in Mayflower Primary School to ever take home a pile of books or sit at the end of the day with a pile of books. It doesn't happen here. In my day, I've been teaching for nearly 30 years now. And I remember, often if I taught maths and English and maybe science all in the same day, I would be taking home 90 books to mark. And actually, that's not something, that's a thing of the past. So we're very much forward thinking in terms of live marking, adaptive marking and feedback, so that there is no need for distance marking of those books. It's all done in the lesson with the children, immediate feedback, etc., which not only helps the children as an obvious given, that if they're getting the feedback there and then, they're going to be able to actually do something with it. But actually, it means you're not taking home piles of books to mark. So they're just 2 other really little.
And that's good. Just to add, and we know, because I know from your good grade last year, that you don't have to. In other words, doing what you've just done does not mean you don't get a good Ofsted rating. So obviously important.
Yes.
And Ofsted
doesn't mean we don't mark. It means we're doing it in the lesson, not at home with a glass of wine.
Absolutely. So there are things that you can do that don't mean you have to do huge workload, that will allow you still to achieve the right results, I guess, for your children, in terms of the outcomes, in terms of being seen to be doing the right things in terms of inspection, but actually doing the right things for your staff to make it that work-life balance as good as you can do. So that's great. So keep going, because it's much more interesting. I know you're just looking down the things you shared, but
I've got bullet points of about 30 things here, and we've only actually talked really about 5 of them.
Well, pick out. We've got a few minutes left, so pick out a few more that you think have made an impact or a difference that you regularly. Because I know you check in regularly with staff. I know you talk to the staff. I know you're out and about, but not like all the time. But it is being intentional in what you do, isn't it? Often
it is.
And planning it, not just going, oh, I've got an open door, and but actually planning a small amount of time. And I know, talking to you, but when you've got something busy to do, it's okay to shut your door and get it done. But as long as people know when they have time and you're intentional about it, it kind of really works well. So
that's it. Yeah, so the open door policy is a really important one. And you're right, I do have a little notice on my door that says doors open all the time. You can come in and talk about whatever you need to talk about. But if it is shut, probably actually means I'm actually in a meeting or I'm on a phone call. But that doesn't mean I'm never going to talk to you. It means just, can you come back a bit later when it's open? So definitely have that. The open door policy and being able to talk openly and honestly with each other is really important. There are other silly things like when I came here 6 years ago, there was a little Tupperware box on the table with a few on my desk with a few coins in it. And I was sort of like, oh, what's this? And I was told, well, that's the tea and coffee money and you're in charge of it. People have to pay you. And I went, what? So no. When you come to work and you do a hard, challenging job like we do, I'm not going to make you pay for your own tea and coffee. I know it's difficult in small schools with budget constraints, but actually just being able to go and get a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and have milk in the fridge whenever you need it, I think is a really important thing. It's so little, but it is so important. I used to do, we used to have a lot of biscuits and chocolate going on in the staff room as well. But actually, having listened to staff, they have said, but actually that's not doing our waistlines any good as much as we love it. So for a short while, we've changed the biscuits and the chocolate into a bowl of fruit. There's fruit in primary schools all the time, isn't there? Because we get the fruit scheme for Key Stage 1. There's always bags of pears or things left over. And it just takes a nice little quiet word, a nice friendly chat with your kitchen to say, oh, let's suppose I could have a couple of oranges or some grapes every week. And they actually do a beautiful fruit bowl for us in our staff room every week. So there's always some fruit for you at break time, as well as your tea and your coffee.
And just on that, before you go on, I'm just going to say it's interesting because you know this, because I think it's where I started when I first presented to the Primary Heads Association in Essex all that time ago, just before COVID struck. When you and many other schools from Essex kind of joined us, I did talk around culture, cake and yoga. And people often say, because it's culture first, there's nothing wrong with cake, fruit and yoga necessarily, but only if you built the foundations first. So putting a fruit bowl in a staff room like you're doing now would add no value if you hadn't done all the other things first, if you weren't communicating well, if you weren't doing the stuff. So just for those listeners out there, this isn't a quick fix thing that we do all this nice stuff. You have to get the foundations right. By all means, then add fruit, add staff activities, do some occasional cakes and chocolate, fantastic, really add. But if the cake and the yoga, the chocolates, the fruit are your strategy for staff wellbeing, it largely won't work. Well, not largely, it won't work. The other thing I often say is it's tea, toilets, and leadership behaviours, and I think you encompass that really well. We provide the coffee, we've got decent facility. They don't have to be spectacular, and I know there's some older schools there, but we can keep them clean and they're good enough. And then how me and the leadership team behave every day, it's really get those things right, and we're off and running.
I think I talked about it a bit earlier about actually, really understanding what your staff need and what they want. And I felt that CPD, continuing professional development, was one of those key things as well. I think that's really important, that actually I value you, and I'm not sending you on a course because I don't think you're good at something. I'm actually sending you on a course because I value you and I want you to develop even more. So our CPD opportunities here are also a high priority. In my first few years here, it was one of my biggest budgets, above and beyond anything else, because I really think staff need to be and feel valued. And at the same time, to be able to do that, I think a lot of the time I like to give staff time to do things when they want to do things. So, for example, we do have a policy here. We have a PPA policy about any release time that you might get, that actually you can take that at home. That actually, I don't mind trusting you taking your PPA time at home. We'll have a policy in place. There are a few parameters. Don't be parading around yourself in a beauty salon at 1:30 whenever all the parents think you actually should be working. But actually, if you need to do something, like maybe there's an event at your child's school, or maybe you'd really like to pick up your children from nursery one day and the only way to do it is on a PPA afternoon, then that's fine. You do that. That's absolutely fine. It's a lot of it, I think, is a bit of give and take. It is, I'm going to trust you to do this. Doesn't mean your planning's not going to get done. It just means if I'm giving you the time to do that in your PPA, I'm trusting you that you're going to make up that time somewhere else. And I think that's a really important thing, to have that give and take. So with support staff, for example, they don't have planning time, but we do work on toil. So we do say, well, actually, if they need to do something and they're like, oh, I'd really like to do such and such, and this has come up, then actually I might say, well, they're fine with swapping a day, or saying, well, actually, I'd really like to come and help with sports day that day, but I don't work that afternoon. But if I went and did this that afternoon, could that be toil? You know, that kind of thing. Having a bit of give and take, I think, goes a really long way. And I know it's a fine line, because in some schools, if you haven't got, like you say, you haven't got that culture and that ethos embedded, and you haven't done the groundwork, then you might be in a position where people do start to take the mickey and they start to push the boundaries. But it's just having that mutual respect and understanding that, do you know what, I will listen and I will take this on board, and I will do this for you if you do this for me. And I think that's a really important part of a culture of a school. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, because when we talk about flexible working, people often immediately go to job shares and part-time, which again are particularly important considerations, particularly if you want to retain staff that perhaps are having families, irrespective of whether it's fair on other people or not. You know, it's about the bigger picture. But flexible working comes in so many guises, as you say. Toil is a good example, time off in lieu. As is, being flexible and allowing people with the PPA. Yeah. And I often say, when people say to me, "Oh, flexible working in schools is difficult," I say it is far more difficult, without a doubt. And teachers working from home during the week, or shorter working weeks, very challenging to do any of that. So the question often is, yeah, but what can I do? What are the small steps we could take that would make a difference for people, that potentially would just show that we are doing give and take, where we are creating an environment where there is some flexibility. And as you say, when you then need them, or something goes wrong, or there's a real issue, they give their time willingly, that discretionary time willingly, and it just creates a really good team spirit.
I think there's nothing sadder than talking to a teacher and them say, oh, I've never been to my child's sports day, or I didn't get to go to their leavers assembly in year 6. And I think that's so sad, because actually, my children didn't come to my own, like where I worked in my primary school. I jumped to too many different primary schools during the time. They wouldn't have been able to keep up. But you don't always have your children in your school with you. But being able to say to somebody, of course you can have an hour to go and see your child's leaving assembly. Of course you can have an hour to go and join in and watch their sports day. I think that's so valuable, and I think people really do appreciate it. And if it's doable and it can be covered, and it's not going to cost you anything, which invariably it probably can be, with staff helping each other out, or HLTAs maybe doing something, or however you organise it in your school, it's always a little way that you can get through and actually work it out to help support staff in that way.
Yeah, that's very good. We're working towards the end now, so before I ask you my final question, just from your list, I guess, is there anything else that you haven't shared that you think, oh, I'd really like to just talk about this as something we do, or how we've set things up?
I think the only other thing to talk about really is just making it a very obvious thing that we do in the school. So we do have very obvious posters up that actually signpost staff of places to go. It's not just something that's talked about or whispered about. We used to have, it's not there anymore actually, we've moved it, but we had a great big display. You have the children's displays. We had one for teachers. We had one for support staff. It was a big well-being display, all about that your mental health is really important. And here are places and posters and things and signposts where you can go and get help, or talk to people, or find other stuff out. And I think that's important. So what we also do is, when we look at and this is a bit of a boring thing really, but when you're looking each year at your staff insurance policy, as we have to do in leadership, that's the boring side of our job. Actually looking at your insurance policy, has it got a wellbeing package linked to it? Actually, this year we found one where we saved money, but we got more, because we found an insurance package that has got a great big wellbeing package attached to it that everyone has access to, and it's got a wealth of resources. And those are the sorts of things that actually, I'm not just picking any old insurance service that I want to use. I'm picking one that's going to work for us and our staff. So it's little things like that that kind of go on behind the scenes that I think are really important as well. And so signposting and knowing where to go and having those sorts of things in mind is really important too.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And I know, talking to you last week, obviously you've got access to the 100 get a little plug in for Welbee, you know, the 130 plus wellbeing resources and the world's first AI personal wellbeing assistant for staff. But obviously things like, I know there's insurance companies that offer things like counselling and various other bits, so it really complements well. Yeah. And I remember a conversation last week, because although I know you've still got those posters up for people, I remember you saying, but am I right in, just make sure I haven't got the wrong conversation, but you took them out of the staff room to make the staff, yeah. Yes, so I just think it was right. Useful. So yes. Although they're there and people can find that, you make a deliberate decision about the staff room. And apologies to all those schools I know who haven't got the facilities and I do talk to some schools that actually don't have the room for a staff room. So apologies to those schools that don't have personal facilities. But if you do, or even whatever your facilities you've got, you know, this is something I know Liz did.
Yes, yeah, we did. We budgeted for it and we did think about it long and hard. But our staff room was always very much a very bland, ordinary staff room with very ordinary school looking chairs and tables, very generic, and we hated it. It had boards, you know, health and safety notices, it had our pigeonholes in it. It was very school led, so no matter what you were doing in school, you were always thinking about school. And actually we took the decision, and I have to confess, this is one thing I didn't consult my staff with. I did it in secret over a summer holiday, and it was a big surprise, was that I gutted it. We painted it. Again, didn't buy the paint. I used paint that I'd got in my house. So one of the walls in the staff room is the same colour as my lounge at home. But we did budget buy chairs and tables and make it a little bit more interesting, a bit more comforting. It's got nothing linked to school in it. There's not a pigeonhole, a whiteboard, a notice, nothing. There are plants, there are shelves. There's a bookcase with books where we swap books and novels. There's pictures on the wall, a mirror on the wall, which is nice. And it's very much a mixture of armchairs and little bistro tables. And now the staff, apart from the fact that they were utterly delighted when they first saw it, but actually I now have many, many more staff coming to the staff room at lunchtime. And it turns into like a little busy, it feels like a cafe bistro-y kind of vibe in there, and we chat and we talk. So there's only 3 little tables, so 12 seated around the 3 little tables all together, and then about 8 or 9 armchairs. They're only small ones because we couldn't fit in much space. It's not big by any stretch of the imagination, but it's enough that people now want to be in there. They want to be in there, they want to come and relax, and even you might only be grabbing your 20 minutes, eating a sandwich and having a quick coffee before going back, but that 20 minutes is proper you time, and it's proper time to just go, oh, at the end of a tough morning. And yes, we talk about work, who doesn't? But actually it's a safe space to talk about, oh, had an awful lesson this morning, not doing that again, or oh, something really funny happened in my class today, I've got to tell you, it was so funny. And it's just a really, really good, buzzy, interactive environment, and so many more staff go to it. It's been brilliant. And even if I didn't have that budget, I think and it wasn't a huge budget, I'm not going to lie, we're not talking big money, but I think I would have had to have done something to revamp that staff room, even if it was just keeping the old chairs and tables and giving it a paint and getting away the awful notice boards. But actually I just needed it to be a safe chill out zone, and it has been one of the best things I've done in a long time. They very, very much appreciated it. And all that stuff has gone somewhere else. It has gone somewhere else. We have still got pigeonholes. We have still got notice boards. They're just not in the staff room.
It's not interrupting time when actually we can be talking to each other, creating a buzz, relaxing, switching tasks, recharging our batteries, all those kind of things, which is brilliant. To be honest, I was going to ask you a final question, but I think we've probably run out of time. But go on, I'll ask it very quickly anyway. Sure. Just a very short answer for you to finish. So, you're obviously you've over the last years you've been there, built a really good place to work. I've seen that in person. I can see it every time I talk to you. I can see it in the results of your wellbeing surveys and what happens afterwards. But not every school's so lucky. We work with schools that are in a much different position, where actually we see from their staff comments in service, some other stuff, that actually it's not a great place to work. So if you could say, look, there's one thing to start doing, if you're in that position, then just there's one thing that if you just started this would make the biggest difference. Because some of those other things you've talked about might be a little bit more longer term. If there's one thing you're just saying, look, just start doing this tomorrow, if you don't do it already, because people do, what might that be?
Listen.
Okay.
It would be to listen and to actually open your door and just listen and try to start unpicking, what is it do people need? Where do we need to begin? But listening and giving staff that voice. And I don't mean a voice of moaning and groaning, and I just mean just listen, really listen. What is it that is going to make the biggest difference to your staff? Because it's going to be different for everyone, but just I think listening and being that open, honest leader, I think is really, really important. Being transparent.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. If you add to that just being visible and showing appreciation, for me, which is one of the biggest things we see. And by that, I mean, walking about and in the moment, praise and recognition that's specific, just doing those couple of things that I know from working lots of schools would make a massive difference. Liz, I just want to say a huge thank you for joining us for this podcast episode and for sharing some of the things that you do in your school. I know I'll be looking forward to working on next year, and I look forward to your next survey, which I have absolutely no doubts is going to be an outstanding score, just because of the things that you do with your team and that I see every time we talk. So thanks very much for spending what is effectively the end of your lunchtime, I guess, into the early afternoon, and giving that time to us. It's been a real privilege talking to you, and obviously as some people said to me this week, as we crawl towards the end of term, we're on the Wednesday now and what have you, as we crawl to the end of term, I'm not sure staff in your school will be feeling quite as crawling as they do in some schools, but I hope you and your team and actually everybody listening to the podcast episode have a fabulous summer, and particularly those working term time have the opportunity to really recharge batteries. And to those of you that we work with in MATs that are on their 12-month calendar contracts and what have you, they always say to me though that actually it's a great time to get things done, because with the schools away, at least they have more focus time and more time for themselves. So whatever your situation, I hope you have a fantastic summer, and depending on when you're listening to this, because it might have happened already, but thanks again, Liz, for spending your time, and I really do appreciate your support for this and for your time as a customer.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Liz. Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Culture, Cake and Yoga. If you'd like to find out more about Welbee and how we can support your trust district school or college with improving staff wellbeing and your climate, to realise all the evidence-proven benefits, visit us at welbee.co.uk or reach out to me directly with a direct message on Twitter to Welbee.